Yo, what's going on, true Blazer fans? It's Torey, and I'm back with another video. Now, this video is going to be a little bit different, as we're going to be talking about one of the hottest debate in not only Blazer circles, but the NBA circle as well. This situation is the hottest topic in the league, and I can't wait to jump into it. But first, make sure to hit subscribe down below, as well as follow us on Twitter. The links are in the description below. There's a link to my personal YouTube channel down there as well, and I will be shortly posting a top 100 NBA players list for 2018-2019. So if you're interested in that, you can subscribe to my channel as well. With all that being said, let's start talking about the Jimmy Butler situation that's going on in Minnesota right now. To start off, we have to recap as to how we got to this point with Jimmy Butler wanting out of Minnesota. It started a little over a year ago when Jimmy Butler basically wanted out of Chicago, when he made it known that it was either going to be his way or Coach Fred Hoiberg's way. The Bulls front office chose Hoiberg and chose a rebuild, shipping Jimmy Butler out to Minnesota. That situation is a big red flag, as I've heard from somebody who has sources within the Bulls front office that basically said that Jimmy Butler needs to be in control of basically the entire organization, how the teams run, among other aspects. So that led Jimmy Butler getting traded to the Minnesota Timberwolves for a package that included the 7th overall pick, which became Lauri Markkanen, Chris Dunn, as well as Zach LaVine, who was coming off an ACL tear. That was a pretty solid package for the Chicago Bulls, and the Timberwolves, when they do trade Jimmy Butler, they probably won't get back that much in return. The situation in Minnesota looked promising for being able to retain Jimmy Butler. They had his old head coach, who he really respected, in Tom Thibodeau. They had two bright, young, up-and-coming supposed stars in Andrew Wiggins and Karl-Anthony Towns. Of course, Wiggins was downright awful last year, but still, those are two top prospects and two guys who have all-star potential. Karl-Anthony Towns is basically at that level already. And then the team was contending for home court advantage up until Jimmy Butler missed a good portion of the second half of the season with an injury. That led to them barely getting the 8th seed, but with the healthy season of Jimmy Butler in the next year, it seemed like they would contend for home court advantage again. However, at the start of the 2018 offseason, there were reports that Jimmy Butler was not happy with his teammates in Karl-Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins. And while current reports say that those reports were overblown and weren't really true, I do believe there might be some credence to them, as Jimmy Butler is a guy who worked his way up from being a homeless kid growing up to a junior college level basketball player to playing at Marquette University, where he worked his way into being the last pick of the first round. That's a lot of progress, but he still wasn't supposed to be an NBA All-Star, which is what he ended up developing to through hard work. He was able to become one of the top 10 or 15 players in the NBA. Andrew Wiggins and Karl-Anthony Towns, on the other hand, have always been top prospects, and it was no surprise that they made the NBA. And with Karl-Anthony Towns, there was no surprise that he ended up turning into an All-Star. They're so naturally gifted that it wouldn't surprise me that they didn't have anywhere near as hard of a work ethic as Jimmy Butler, and they just got by on their natural gifts. Combined with a lot of people who watch the Timberwolves more than me saying Andrew Wiggins doesn't play with enough heart, I could definitely see how those reports could be true. So keeping track of what we've gone over so far, which will set the table for the rest of this video. One negative of Jimmy Butler wanting too much control within an organization and how the team runs, which could clash with Dame, but also a positive where Jimmy Butler has a very hard work ethic and seems to respect players that have the same level of work ethic with him, which would mesh well with Dame and might mitigate Jimmy Butler's need for control. So recent reports have stated that Jimmy Butler has asked for a trade from the Minnesota Timberwolves due to contractual matters. I'm not quite sure what contractual matters are at play here with Minnesota, because I'm pretty sure they have his bird rights, so they could re-sign him to a 5-year, $190 million contract. So I'm not quite sure what the contractual issue is with Minnesota, and I think it might just be a front because there are other issues at hand, but Jimmy Butler doesn't want to be seen in a negative light by basically asking for a trade because of who his teammates are. I don't really know, but it's been reported that Jimmy Butler has asked for a trade, and the number one team on his short list is apparently the Los Angeles Clippers, which is one of the teams on the short list of Kawhi Leonard's, of destinations where he could potentially sign next summer, and they have the cap space to land both of them. The other two teams on Jimmy Butler's short list of preferred destinations are the Brooklyn Nets and the New York Knicks, both lottery teams that haven't seen success in recent years, but both have a lot of cap space going into next summer, and it's been rumored that he wants to team up with Kyrie Irving in New York or Brooklyn, so that's probably why he's preferring a trade to one of those destinations. He obviously wants to pair with a second star, and he is friends with Kyrie Irving. However, it's been hinted recently that Kyrie has been hinting that he would want to stay with the Celtics, and I don't really see Kyrie leaving because he has a great situation there in Boston, and that team should be a contender for the next decade or so with all the young talent they got there as well as the good veterans. They got a perfect mix. So if Kyrie lets Jimmy Butler know that he wants to stay with the Boston Celtics, I think that Brooklyn and New York wouldn't be that high on his list of destinations, but LA in the New York area, that's the two biggest markets in the NBA, so maybe it's more than just pairing up with Kawhi and Kyrie. Maybe it's that he wants to play in a big market. Either way, this short list of destinations is a red flag for the Portland Trail Blazers if they're looking to trade for him, because Portland isn't a big market, and Portland doesn't have the cap space to go sign Kawhi Leonard or Kyrie Irving. Of course, Jimmy Butler would have a star near that caliber in Damian Lillard, so if he wants just a second star and doesn't care if it's Kyrie or Kawhi, then he might appreciate playing next to Damian Lillard, especially given Damian Lillard's work ethic. But it all mainly comes down to the likelihood of re-signing Jimmy Butler after his contract expires after this year. Now, Jimmy Butler technically has 2 years left on his deal, but that last year is a player option, and he's only making $20 million a year, and if he opts out, he'll be eligible for a contract starting around $30 million a year. So he definitely will opt out. So next year will be his last season under contract. And if you're Portland, you probably want some reassurance that Jimmy Butler will look to re-sign with the Trail Blazers following this season if they were to trade for him. However, like I said, it's not just that. His need for control could be a problem. And then there are a couple GMs who have said he's just a downright awful person. Now, he's not a guy that's getting into trouble off the court or anything like that, so you have to wonder exactly what his character issues are, but apparently he has a few of them, and some GMs have said that they downright would not trade for him just because of his character issues. So it really makes you wonder, if they're really that bad, do you really want to trade for a guy like Jimmy Butler? You know, if he resigns, could it still be a bad thing because he would tear the organization apart from within over the course of a few years? Who knows? Definitely would have to look into that more if I'm Neil Olshey and try and figure out where those rumors and where that talk stems from. Of course, the reason to trade for Jimmy Butler in Portland's scenario is if you were to trade CJ McCollum for him, he'd be what we need at the two-guard position, and because he's 6'8" and 235 pounds and a very good defender, he would provide switchability with Maurice Harkless and Al-Farouq Aminu. All those guys can guard 4 positions, so that would definitely bring some versatility to our defense. It would probably vault us into a top 5, maybe even top 3 defense in the entire NBA. Jimmy Butler is also probably a better offensive player than CJ McCollum because he's able to score the same amount of points at a little better efficiency. He's able to get to the free throw line more, and then he's also a better playmaker and a little better rebounder. So he's just an overall better player than CJ McCollum. So teams are going to be in contact with the owner of the Minnesota Timberwolves because general manager Scott Layden as well as head coach Tom Thibodeau don't want to give up Jimmy Butler. But the owner sees the writing on the wall, sees that Jimmy Butler is going to leave, and he wants to get a return for Jimmy Butler before they lose him for nothing. So it's been reported that he said in a meeting that if opposing GMs can't get anywhere with GM Scott Layden, that they go straight to the top and talk to him. He's also addressed the situation with Scott Layden and said that not only does he want his general manager to listen to offers for Jimmy Butler, but he also wants to reach out to other teams to see if they'll be interested and what they would give up for Jimmy Butler. That just adds another very interesting wrinkle to the scenario, as I've never seen an owner as at odds with a GM and a head coach as to whether or not to trade a star player who has requested to be traded. Given that they'd probably both lose their jobs if they still continued to refuse to trade Jimmy Butler, I do expect Jimmy Butler will get traded because the owner wants him gone. So that leaves me with two potential trade packages that I think have a chance to land Jimmy Butler. One is centered around a boatload of draft picks and would end up with the Portland Trail Blazers adding Jimmy Butler to a big three, including Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, while the more realistic one involves them trading CJ McCollum away to Minnesota for Jimmy Butler. Here's the first trade, and it's basically swapping Evan Turner for Jimmy Butler, as well as giving Minnesota 3 or 4 future first-round picks. Now that would have to be in 2019, 2021, 2023, and potentially 2025, or you could throw in a right to swap for Minnesota on one of those even years. I don't know, but it'd have to be around 3 or 4 first-round picks, in my opinion, to land Jimmy Butler. This would basically be Portland's all-in move, as it would probably make them the third best team in the Western Conference, and this team could possibly push Houston in a 7-game series and contend for a Western Conference Finals berth. With Jimmy Butler starting at small forward, that gives Portland 3 very good offensive players, and Jimmy Butler's defense would be a huge help at that small forward position. Maurice Harkless is a pretty good defender as well, but having Jimmy Butler starting at small forward and getting Evan Turner out of there would allow Maurice Harkless to come off the bench and bring some energy as well as some defensive versatility, and having Maurice Harkless off the bench instead of Evan Turner would make our bench better. Tom Thibodeau is known to be the only Evan Turner fan outside of Portland's front office. Maybe Tom Thibodeau wants Evan Turner back, and this is the owner saying, okay, I got my 4 future draft picks, you can have Evan Turner. I don't know, maybe that's hopelessly optimistic as to them being fine taking back Evan Turner's deal, but it would match salary perfectly, and it'd be swapping 2 small forwards. So in that regard, it makes a lot of sense. However, for this trade to go through and Minnesota to be happy with it, it probably means that Jimmy Butler's trade value would have to be lower than many people think, which is a definite possibility given Jimmy Butler's character concerns as well as his contract concerns and the possibility of him bolting for Brooklyn or New York or Los Angeles. Those 3 are probably going to be the teams that Portland would be bidding against, but maybe there's a small chance this gets taken, and this is the deal that I'd want. If Jimmy Butler leaves, you at least cleared Evan Turner's contract off the books and would likely have a full mid-level exception next offseason to be able to replace Jimmy Butler at that small forward spot, or you could get a small forward off the bench and put Maurice Harkless back in there. Basically, this is the trade package where Portland would see the maximum possible benefit in terms of how good they are next year, and would also have the lowest risk in terms of the Portland Trail Blazers being worse than they are now if Jimmy Butler were to leave a year from now. However, it's very, very likely that Portland would have to include CJ McCollum in a trade for Jimmy Butler. So here's the trade package that I think works best for both teams that involves CJ McCollum being traded for Jimmy Butler. So you got CJ McCollum as well as Myers Leonard going to the Timberwolves, and the Portland Trail Blazers get back Jimmy Butler as well as Gorgui Dieng. So the Timberwolves want to trade Gorgui Dieng because he's making $15 million a year over the next 3 years, and they don't really want to pay him that much money, especially since you got Karl Anthony Towns as the center ahead of him on the depth chart. Getting back Myers Leonard's deal saves them $5 million over the next 2 years, and then $15 million in the 3rd year of Dieng's contract. On Portland's end, you give up Myers Leonard for Gorgui Dieng's bigger contract just to sweeten the pot a little bit, and you swap out CJ McCollum for Jimmy Butler in the starting lineup. I think Minnesota would accept this deal on the spot if Neil Olshey offered it, because CJ McCollum is only a little bit worse than Jimmy Butler, has 3 more years on his contract, he's younger, he could probably put up all-star numbers and make the all-star team if he was the #1 scoring option on the Timberwolves. It would just make a ton of sense to get a guy with that value back for a star who has said he's going to leave and has demanded a trade. On Portland's end, you'd have to bank on Damian Lillard and the situation there being able to convince Jimmy Butler to re-sign long-term, much like Russell Westbrook and the Oklahoma City Thunder were able to get Paul George to resign in OKC this past summer. It would also parallel the situation with Kawhi Leonard in Toronto, with Kawhi Leonard supposedly wanting to sign elsewhere next season, but the Toronto Raptors trying to convince him to stay after trading DeMar DeRozan for him. As I've said, I love the fit with Jimmy Butler playing shooting guard with Maurice Maurice Harkless as the small forward, and now Farouk Aminu as the power forward, as all those guys can switch amongst each other and guard 4 positions. You could even potentially have some 2 through 5 switchability if you were to play Zach Collins at the center position with those 3 on the court at the same time. Houston showed last year when they almost beat the Golden State Warriors and lost in 7 games that switchability is key to slowing down the Warriors' offense, as they set a ton of screens and run a lot in transition, so being able to just simply pick up the closest guy to you on the fast break as well as switch all those screens is a very successful defensive tactic against the Golden State Warriors. Switching pick and rolls is the easiest coverage to execute against an offense, and being able to do this would also be a valuable defensive strategy, and with Jimmy Butler at shooting guard, Portland would have the personnel for it. While Portland wouldn't be initially as good as they would be if they just simply traded first-round picks and Evan Turner for Jimmy Butler, and while if Jimmy Butler left, Portland would be worse off since they wouldn't have McCollum, Portland would still have all their future first-round picks, so they would be set up for a rebuild if Jimmy Butler were to leave. That makes the second option much more risky, and I'm not quite sure if I would do this in my opinion. Definitely have to look into some more things about whether Jimmy Butler would want to stay and what are his character concerns. That first trade I would do no matter what, because I think that at some point you got to go all in on Damian Lillard's prime, and you can't worry about losing a first round pick in 2021 or 2023 or 2025, because Damian Lillard has the potential to be the greatest Blazer ever, and not taking a gamble like that and not going all in on his prime would be a mistake in my opinion. If you guys have stuck through this entire video, thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed me going over this Jimmy Butler situation and how it could affect Portland and how it could be one of the turning points in the Portland Trail Blazers franchise. Of course, it could mean nothing at all, but if something does go down, I will try my best to get a video out as quickly as possible discussing whatever happens. Leave a comment down below discussing whether or not you would do either of these deals, whether you'd go after Jimmy Butler in a trade, even if it included CJ McCollum, or if you'd only go after him if it didn't include CJ McCollum. Would you give Zach Collins up in a deal? Let me know down below. In case you can't already tell, I'm exhausted from talking. This video took me about an hour and a half to record, so I really hope you guys enjoyed it. With that being said, that's all I got for now. This has been Torey. I hope you true Blazer fans have an amazing day. Peace out. Go Blazers.